She's furniture, not family. I heard that while clearing the dishes. The next day, I sold the house. The ceiling fan hummed its tired tune above me, pushing around the thick Georgia heat that clung to my skin like regret. The smell of fried okra and cornbread filled the kitchen, but no one seemed to taste anything anymore. Dinner at my son's table had turned into a board meeting I was never invited to, yet always forced to attend. I sat quietly at the end, hands folded, eyes lowered, pretending to listen while they discussed what used to be my home, as if it were an investment portfolio. Evan, my son, was speaking fast, tapping his phone, his tie loosened like a man who thought too much and cared too little. Clara, my daughter-in-law, kept swirling her wine glass, every turn cutting through my nerves like a blade. They spoke about refinancing, about rates, about liquidating dead assets. Then she said it. She's furniture, not family. Her voice didn't shake. She laughed as if she'd told a joke, brushing a strand of blonde hair behind her ear, like she'd brushed away something unimportant. Evan chuckled too, not even glancing at me. Yeah, he added, she came with the house. The words didn't land like an insult. They landed like a verdict. I looked at the reflection in the glass cabinet, an old woman in a faded blue dress, hair pinned tight, hands steady but useless. I stared at her until my pulse steadied. If they thought I was furniture, then I'd learn how long it takes before furniture moves on its own. It's strange. The quiet that follows cruelty. You don't cry right away. You just go still. You begin to listen differently to the tick of the wall clock, to the hum of the refrigerator, to the way silence sounds when respect has left a room. I realized at that moment I wasn't living with my family. I was occupying space they believed already belonged to them. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I excused myself quietly after dinner. No one noticed. They were already on their phones, already planning tomorrow's greed. The hallway lights flickered slightly as I walked toward my bedroom. I could still hear Clara's laugh echoing behind me, brittle and proud. Inside my room, the air was cooler, quieter. On the dresser sat a photograph of my husband, Henry. He'd been gone 12 years. The frame was scratched, but the glass was clean. His smile was still patient, still kind. I touched the edge of it and whispered, "You built this house with your hands, Henry. You said it would last. And it has." I went to the old cedar wardrobe he had built the summer before he died. Its hinges creaked softly as if it remembered him too. Inside, behind folded linens and a shoebox of letters, was a small metal key. I took it to the safe beneath the bed, spun the combination like muscle memory. The door opened with a dull click. The deed was still there, yellowed, crisp around the edges, but my name clear as daylight. Nora Beckett, not Evan, not Clara, mine. I ran my fingers along the ink, tracing each letter like a prayer. I felt the weight of it, not in paper, but in what it meant. Furniture doesn't own property. I do. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint sounds of their laughter drifting down the hallway. It didn't hurt the way it used to. It burned quieter, deeper, steadier. My heart wasn't breaking anymore. It was recording. Every smirk, every careless word, every time they looked through me instead of at me, it was all being stored somewhere safe. People forget that silence is a ledger too, and mine was starting to balance itself. I remembered when Evan was a boy, how he'd fall asleep with his head on my lap, murmuring numbers while I helped him with algebra. He used to say, "Mom, I'll buy you a big house one day." I didn't tell him then that he was already living in the one I'd paid for with 30 years of teaching. Children forget that. Time makes them believe they built the walls they were merely raised inside. Somewhere deep down, a calm thought took root. I had something stronger: patience, knowledge, ownership. I placed the deed back in its envelope, locked it in the safe, and slid it under a loose floorboard. Then I poured myself a glass of water and looked out the window. The magnolia tree outside was blooming despite the heat, heavy with white petals that smelled of old summers and forgotten promises. They thought I was a piece of furniture, useful until inconvenient, familiar until burdensome. But even furniture can bear witness. Even wood remembers every nail that hurt it. One day soon, I thought, this house will remember too. And when it does, it won't be my silence that creaks first. That night I turned off the light, not out of exhaustion but out of intention. I had seen their faces clearly now under the kitchen lamp, had memorized their laughter, the curl of Clara's lip when she spoke. Tomorrow, I'd begin to move quietly. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Evan's voice on the phone, clipped, restless, pacing the hallway. I didn't mean to listen, but walls in old houses don't keep secrets well. His tone was sharp, defensive, the way people sound when they've run out of excuses. "I told you, I'll have the funds soon," he hissed. "Just give me another week. The property will clear once the refinance is approved." Then silence, followed by the sound of him sighing long, heavy, defeated. Later, at breakfast, he smiled too brightly, poured Clara her coffee, and tried to act as though nothing was wrong. But I'd been a teacher for 40 years. I could read tension like handwriting. Clara, sitting across from him, wore her confidence like perfume, loud and deliberate. "You need to fix this, Evan," she said, not bothering to lower her voice even though I was sitting 2 feet away. "I didn't marry debt. If we sell this place, we can cover the losses, start fresh, and finally move somewhere that doesn't smell like dust and regret." Evan's jaw clenched. "It's not that simple, Clara," she scoffed, setting her mug down too hard. "Of course it is. She'll sign whatever you tell her to. Just say it's for taxes." She didn't even glance my way. Maybe she assumed my hearing had gone with my youth. But I heard every syllable. The way she said "she" instead of "your mother." The way Evan didn't correct her. I folded my napkin slowly, careful not to show a flicker of emotion. When I stood to clear the dishes, I heard him mutter, "She's old, Clara. She won't even notice the paperwork. It's just a formality." Clara laughed, that same brittle sound from the night before. "Then it's settled. We'll get the appraisal next week." I kept my back to them, rinsing plates beneath the steady hiss of running water. My voice in my head was calm, measured, the way it used to be when I solved difficult equations on the chalkboard. "They're calculating debt," I thought. They forgot I taught numbers that never lie. I spent the rest of the day pretending to be smaller than I was. I let them think I had drifted into some fog of harmless aging. They spoke around me, not to me, and that invisibility was my advantage. People expose themselves most when they believe you've disappeared. That evening, after the house went quiet, I sat on my bed and opened an old drawer filled with things Henry had left behind, receipts, sketches, and his weathered leather notebook. Inside, the pages smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. He had written everything in neat, blocky handwriting, each line a small act of control in a world that never stopped slipping away from him. Halfway through, I found what I didn't know I was looking for, a page with the name June Harland and a number scrawled beside it. I remembered her then, the quiet girl from my last years of teaching, the one who always stayed behind after class to ask about mortgage math, compound interest, and how people lose their homes. Her mother had lost theirs after her father gambled away their savings. I'd helped her get a scholarship, and she used to send me Christmas cards until she stopped, probably thinking I'd grown too old to remember. But I did. I remembered every child who carried too much shame in their eyes. I stared at that number for a long while. The ink had faded, but the intent hadn't. I didn't know what June was doing now, but the name came with a whisper of purpose. I reached for my old rotary phone, the one Evan said I should have thrown out years ago. The dial turned slowly beneath my fingers, each click echoing like a countdown. It rang 4 times before a woman answered. "Harland Appraisals, this is June." Her voice had matured lower, steadier, but there was a familiarity that warmed me. "June Harland," I said softly. "This is Nora Beckett. I used to teach you algebra. You came by after school one day, crying over a C+, and I told you numbers can only describe value, not define it." There was a pause, then a small gasp. "Mrs. Beckett, I can't believe, how are you?" "Alive," I said simply. but I need a favor, a quiet one." Her tone shifted, professional now, but touched with concern. "Of course. What do you need?" "I think my son and his wife are planning to sell the house I still own. I'd like someone honest to take a look at it, someone who won't tell them I asked." There was another silence, but this one felt protective, not hesitant. "You've always been good to me," she said finally. "You taught me more than numbers. You taught me how to see patterns where others only saw chaos. I'll help you. Just send me the address." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "You already know it, June. You used to walk past it on your way to school." After hanging up, I turned off the lamp and sat for a moment in the dark. The house creaked around me like an old friend shifting in its sleep. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Evan's low voice again, talking to someone on speakerphone, desperate and hollow. I lay back, eyes open to the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks that ran like veins across it. Every one of them told a story of pressure, of time, of endurance. I whispered to myself, "Cracks don't mean collapse. They just show where something refused to break." Tomorrow, they would begin their plans. Tomorrow, I would begin mine. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger wastes too much energy. What I felt was precision, cold, mathematical precision. They had made their calculation. Now it was my turn to solve for justice. The following Thursday, the doorbell rang just as I was watering the ferns on the porch. Clara's voice cut through the air, crisp and rehearsed. "That must be the appraiser," she said, as if she were the lady of the house and not a guest squatting on someone else's generosity. I stayed where I was, hidden behind the lace curtains, watching through the glass. When I opened the door, the sunlight hit her face, first June Harland, older now, her eyes sharper but still carrying that gentle steadiness, I remembered. She froze for half a second when she saw me. Then, in a whisper only I could catch, she said, "Mrs. Beckett." I nodded slightly, our shared past flickering between us like a secret handshake. Clara swept in before I could speak. "Come in, Miss Harland," she said in that falsely sweet tone reserved for people she thought were useful. "Ignore the mess. Old houses collect clutter the way old people collect stories." She glanced at me when she said it. June smiled politely, but her eyes didn't play along. "Some stories," she said, "are worth keeping." We began the tour. Evan followed behind her, speaking quickly, gesturing toward the walls and windows as if enthusiasm could hide desperation. "It's structurally sound," he said. "A few repairs, but it's valuable property, great location, solid bones." June nodded, jotting notes into her tablet. I walked behind them, fingers brushing along the banister Henry had sanded smooth years ago. Every groove of that wood felt like memory resisting intrusion. When we reached the living room, Clara wrinkled her nose. "Don't mind the smell," she said, waving her hand. "Old houses and old women both fall apart if you touch too hard." Evan snorted, half amused, half nervous. June didn't answer. She bent down, pretending to inspect the baseboard, her jaw tightening. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker recognition and maybe anger she didn't show. Evan's phone rang, saving him from silence. "Excuse me," he muttered, stepping outside. Clara followed, whispering about potential buyers. The moment their voices disappeared down the hallway, June stood up straight and looked directly at me. "They're planning something, aren't they?" she asked softly. I exhaled, the air leaving me in a tired sigh. "Yes. They think they can trick me into signing the house away." June's expression darkened. "Evan sent me an email this morning. He wants a valuation and a copy of a temporary transfer of ownership document to be ready by Monday. I checked the file name. It's not standard. It's designed to look like an appraisal release." "Forgery?" "More like deception," she said. "It'll look legitimate enough to fool a bank clerk, and if you sign, they can sell this house without your consent." I studied her face, the same girl who used to stay after class to talk about equations and fairness, the one whose mother once cried in my kitchen after being thrown out by her husband. Back then, I gave them the spare room for a month, Taught June how to calculate mortgage interest so her mother wouldn't be cheated again. Do you still remember what I told you about math? I asked. She smiled faintly. That numbers don't lie, but people do. Good, because I need your numbers to tell a truth they can't erase. June nodded, lowering her voice. I owe you one, Mrs. Beckett. Let's make it count. I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years, something beyond anger, something like quiet solidarity. In a world that dismissed both of us at different times, we were suddenly equals again. Not teacher and student, but women who had learned how to survive deceit. We heard footsteps returning. June quickly bent back down, scribbling fake notes, her face neutral again. Evan reappeared, smiling too wide. Everything looking good? He asked. June straightened, her professionalism back in place. Quite. It's a beautiful home. These walls hold a lot of history. Clara laughed. More like ghosts. June met her eyes. Ghosts remember, Mrs. Beckett. They always do. When they left, I walked her out to her car. Before opening the door, she turned to me. Give me a few days. I'll get proof of what they're trying to do. You'll have every document. I nodded. Be careful. They think everyone is for sale. She smiled without humor. Then they've forgotten who taught me my worth. As her car pulled away, I watched the reflection of the house in the rear window fade into distance. The air was heavy, but not suffocating anymore. Somewhere in that humidity, I felt movement small, deliberate, like the first tick of a clock that's been still too long. For the first time in months, the walls around me didn't feel like witnesses. They felt like allies. The house had started to listen, and soon it would speak. June called me 2 days later. Her voice was low but certain, the way people speak when they've found both truth and danger in the same breath. Mrs. Beckett, she said. I looked into the zoning records. Your house sits inside the historic district boundary. That means if you file for preservation status, no sale or mortgage can proceed without your written, living consent. It locks everything in place legally. I sat in the kitchen, the ceiling fan stirring slow circles above me. And if I do that, I asked, what happens to their little plan? It freezes it, she said. They can't touch it until you're gone, which, judging by your voice, won't be any time soon. I smiled for the first time in days. Then let's make history official. That afternoon, I drove downtown to meet Mr. Pike, Henry's oldest friend, the man who'd helped us buy this very home 40 years ago. He was retired now, but still practiced enough to see through deceit like smoke. His office smelled of paper and pine polish, everything neat and deliberate, like him. When he saw me, his brows lifted. Nora Beckett, he said, I haven't seen you since Henry's memorial. Life hasn't gotten less complicated, I said. He gestured for me to sit. Tell me. I laid it out plain. Evan's debts, Clara's greed, the forged papers, the insult of being called furniture in my own house. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers. I've handled 1,000 family disputes, he said quietly, but cruelty always sounds the same. He slid a file toward me, already half prepared. This is an application for historic preservation status. If you sign and file this, the property becomes untouchable while you're alive. No bank can refinance it. No buyer can close a sale. It's yours, sealed by law. I looked at the form, my own name printed neatly across the top. What if they push harder, threaten, trick, or guilt me? He met my eyes. Then remember this. If you sign, you lose. If you stay silent, you win. Silence, in law and in life, can be power. When I left his office, I felt lighter, not safe, but armed. For the first time, their voices in my head sounded small. That evening, I started collecting proof. June forwarded copies of emails Evan had sent to potential buyers, emails written under my name. We are eager to move forward with the sale, one read. The grammar was flawless, but the tone wasn't mine. I saved everything onto a flash drive. Then I began recording, slipping my old phone under the table during dinner. Clara talked too much when she drank. Once the sale clears, she said one night. We can put her in that care home off Mason Avenue. They have bingo nights. She'll think it's a vacation. Evan laughed softly. She'll sign anything I give her. Their words became evidence, time-stamped truth. Each file I saved was a nail in the coffin of their plan. The following evening, Evan knocked on my door, holding a stack of papers and a pen. He smiled, that too smooth kind of smile children wear when they think they're still fooling you. Mom, I need you to sign something quick. Just a temporary authorization so I can handle some tax paperwork for the house. I took the pen with trembling hands, not from fear but from calculation. You said it's temporary? Of course, he said. You trust me, right? I smiled faintly. Always have. I looked down at the signature line, the ink already bleeding faintly through the cheap paper. My hand shook, deliberately this time. I signed but slightly above the line, crossing the boundary of the legal box. A misplaced mark that any lawyer would call invalid. Evan didn't even look. Thank you, he said, relieved. This means a lot. When he left, I stood by the window and whispered to the night air. If they wanted my signature, they'll have it, but they won't like what it means. I placed the unsigned recording device back into the drawer and closed it gently. The house around me seemed to breathe with me, slow and patient. Every creak, every whisper of wood against wind, felt like it understood. By morning, the deed would be locked under preservation law, my recording stored safely, my silence sharpened into strategy. I didn't need to raise my voice, I just needed to wait. The invitation came in the form of a demand. Clara's voice floated through the hallway that afternoon, bright and commanding. Dinner tonight, 7 o'clock, she said. Dress nice, Nora, we're celebrating good news. Good news, in that house, had started to sound like a threat. By the time I came downstairs, the table was set as if for guests we didn't deserve crystal glasses, the good plates Henry and I had bought on our 25th anniversary, even the silverware I kept wrapped in cloth to keep it from tarnishing. Clara had lit candles, her perfume thick in the air, sweet but stifling. Evan wore the suit I'd bought him for his first job interview years ago, the same one that still made him look like he might be worth saving. He stood when I entered, his smile too wide. There she is, he said, our honored guest. Guest, I repeated softly, taking my seat at the end of the table. That's new. Clara poured wine into my glass, even though I rarely drank. You'll want a sip of this, she said. We finally have an offer. Someone's interested in the house. I ran a finger around the rim of my glass, watching the candlelight bend inside it. That's fast, I said. Did you tell them the furniture comes with it? Her smile tightened. You're funny tonight. Evan jumped in quickly. Mom, it's just talk for now, nothing's final. But if things go well, we could all be in a new place by summer. I see. I lifted my glass but didn't drink. And where would I be, exactly? Clara's tone turned syrupy. There's a lovely retirement home off Mason Avenue. They have karaoke nights. You'll love it. I smiled back, calm, steady. Maybe. But I hope they have a mirror so you can meet your soul someday. Evan laughed too loudly, trying to diffuse the sting. She's losing it, Clara. Don't mind her. But for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, shame, quickly buried under guilt's oldest disguise, denial. They ate like people who had already won. Clara kept refilling her glass, talking about how she'd modernize her next house, how she was tired of this antique life. Evan nodded, pretending confidence he didn't feel. Every time he said we, I wondered if he realized how temporary that word could be. I chewed slowly, tasting nothing but calculation. Each bite gave me time to think. June had called earlier that afternoon to confirm the final step. She'd sent copies of every fraudulent email and forged document to my inbox, all labeled neatly. Once you send them to the county office, she said, they'll have no choice but to investigate. So I sat through the meal, nodding at the right moments, laughing when Clara laughed, letting them believe I'd surrendered. People like them need applause more than they need victory. I gave them both. After dessert, Evan leaned back, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Mom," he said, "you've been so understanding. I promise once everything's settled, we'll make sure you're comfortable." "Comfortable," I repeated. "Like furniture?" He froze, then forced a chuckle. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant," I said, my voice so quiet it almost didn't exist. "And that's fine. Some furniture lasts longer than the people who use it." Clara stood, annoyed. "God, Nora, can you stop with the dramatics? We're doing this for everyone's benefit. You can't even maintain this place." I looked around the room, the walls Henry had painted, the window frames he'd carved, the light fixtures we'd chosen together. "You're right," I said finally. "It takes someone alive to maintain a house." She didn't understand what I meant. That made it better. When they finally went upstairs, I stayed behind, clearing the table the way I always did. Their laughter trailed from the hallway, muffled and careless. It was almost peaceful once they were gone. I wiped down each plate slowly, letting the rhythmic scrape of the cloth steady my breathing. Then I took out the manila envelope I'd hidden under the drawer liner. Inside were everything June had sent, the printed emails, the copies of Evan's forged authorization papers, and Clara's message to a realtor she'd been flirting with for weeks. "Once the sale clears, we'll celebrate properly." I added the recordings from my phone, their talk of nursing homes, the way they joked about my signing hand. I sat at my old desk and began to write. The letter was short, plain, factual. To the Office of Land and Property, Chatham County. I believe there has been an attempt to commit fraud concerning the sale of my home, located at 114 Marlowe Street. Enclosed are all related communications and documents. Sincerely, Mrs. B. I didn't sign my full name. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. At midnight, I sealed the envelope, addressed it carefully, and walked outside. The air smelled like wet magnolia. I placed the envelope into the blue mailbox at the end of the drive and let it drop. The metallic thud sounded final. Back inside, I paused at the foot of the stairs. I could hear Clara humming from the bedroom, off-key and smug. Evan said something low and tired, and she laughed again, that awful laugh that had once made me flinch, but now only proved how little she understood. I turned off the hallway light and whispered, "Let's see what the real appraisal says." The night pressed close around me, soft and heavy. The house groaned in the quiet, as if it knew it had waited long enough. Soon, the truth would move through its walls the way air finds a crack, slow, invisible, unstoppable. They thought I'd given up. I'd simply given them rope. The letter came 3 mornings later, heavy with government ink and consequence. Evan was the one who found it first, tucked among bills and credit statements. I heard the envelope tear from the kitchen where I was making tea. The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through the air. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. The chair scraped against the tile as he stood. Clara, still in her robe, leaned against the counter with a smirk. "Another overdue notice?" He didn't answer. I watched his hands tremble as he read. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and small. "It's from the Chatham County Office of Land and Property," he said finally, voice brittle. They've frozen the house." Clara frowned. "Frozen? What do you mean frozen?" He read aloud, stumbling over the words. "Effective immediately, due to allegations of elder coercion and fraudulent authorization, the property at 114 Marlowe Street is under investigation. All transactions are suspended pending review." The kettle screamed before I did. I turned it off, calm as still water. "Elder coercion," Clara repeated, laughing nervously. "That's ridiculous. Who would even—" She stopped, eyes darting toward me. "You." I set the kettle down. "Me? I'm just furniture, remember?" Her mouth opened, then shut. Evan's voice rose, desperate now. "Mom, you don't understand. This will ruin everything. The bank will cancel the loan, and they'll come after us for the debt." I stirred my tea. "Then I suggest you start practicing humility. You'll need it where you're going." Before either of them could speak, a car door slammed outside, then another, the sound of boots on gravel. Clara moved to the window, and I saw her face collapse in real time. "Evan, it's the police." He ran to the front door just as 2 officers stepped inside, badges glinting. Behind them came a man in a gray suit, Mr. Pike, his expression carved from marble. One of the officers spoke firmly. "We have a warrant to search the premises in connection with a complaint of elder financial coercion and document falsification." Evan stammered. "This is insane." "We didn't," Mr. Pike interrupted. "Evan Beckett, your emails and phone records tell a different story." He handed over a file. "We have correspondence between you and several real estate agents, along with a forged signature from your mother on an authorization document dated last week." Clara's voice cracked. "That's not possible. She signed it herself." Mr. Pike turned to her, eyes cold. "And then there's you, Mrs. Beckett Jr. Text messages to your business partner, Mr. Rollins. She won't last long anyway. We'll close the sale once she's gone." He held up a printed screenshot. "Would you like to read it out loud?" Clara went pale, stumbling backward until she hit the counter. They began to collect papers and devices. Evan's protests grew weaker with each passing minute. "Mom," he said finally, turning to me, voice breaking. "I was desperate. I just needed to fix things." I looked at him the way a teacher looks at a student who's failed the same test too many times. "Desperation doesn't erase cruelty, Evan. You didn't lose control, you made a choice." He sank into the chair, face in his hands. "You've ruined me." "No," I said quietly. "You ruined yourself the moment you decided I was expendable." One of the officers approached. "Ma'am, we'll need to verify a few details with you. You're safe to stay in the residence during the process." I nodded. "Take your time. The truth has been waiting long enough." They moved methodically, checking drawers, photographing documents. Every click of the camera felt like punctuation at the end of a long, silent sentence. Clara began to cry, real tears this time, but they looked wrong on her too late, too performative. When she saw me watching, she whispered, "You've been planning this, all this time." I sipped my tea, still warm. Planning? No. I was simply paying attention. The room buzzed with the static of consequence, and then, as if the universe wanted to make the lesson complete, a phone vibrated on the counter. Clara's. One of the officers glanced at the screen. "You might want to see this," he said to Pike. It was a breaking news alert from the local station. The headline read, "Real estate investors' affair with developer exposed in loan scandal." The photo beneath it showed Clara and a man I didn't recognize, holding hands at a restaurant table. Evan saw it too. His face went slack, then crumpled. "You," he said, his voice hollow. "You were sleeping with him?" Clara didn't answer. Her silence was an admission. He laughed, once bitter, short. "You used me. You both did." The officer stepped between them. "That's enough." I stood quietly, watching my son's world fold in on itself. It didn't feel like triumph, not exactly. More like symmetry. The kind life writes when it's finally tired of imbalance. When they read them their rights, Evan didn't fight. He let the handcuffs close around his wrists as if they were bracelets he'd earned. Clara screamed, twisted, begged. Her voice filled the house the way her laughter once had, shrill, hollow, unforgettable. As they led them toward the door, I spoke one last time. "You tried to sell the house," I said, my tone calm, deliberate. "Now the law will appraise you." The officers paused for a moment, unsure if they'd heard right, but Mr. Pike smiled faintly. He understood. When the cars pulled away, the dust hung in the air like a ghost refusing to leave. The street fell silent again. I closed the front door, leaned against it, and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The house was mine again, not because a paper said so, but because the air inside it no longer smelled like deceit. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the magnolia tree swaying softly in the wind. June called. "It's done," she said simply. "Yes," I answered. "It's done." There was a pause. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Not happy. Not sad. Just clean. Like something heavy finally fell off the shelf, I said, and didn't break. From the street, the blue lights faded into distance. The world went quiet, except for the hum of the cicadas. The house creaked once, settling into its foundations, as if acknowledging the end. Justice doesn't shout. It arrives like dawn, slow, certain, and impossible to stop. The trial didn't take long. The evidence was too clean, too complete. My recordings, the forged documents, the emails, they left no room for sympathy. The judge read the sentence in a flat, practiced tone, as though he were announcing the weather. Evan Beckett, 4 years in state prison for financial fraud and elder coercion. Clara Beckett, 2 years probation, community service, and a fine. Her sentence came with a note from the judge about moral failure, a phrase that fit her better than any number could. The courtroom emptied quickly after the verdict. Evan looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders rounded, his hands cuffed in front of him. He turned once, before they led him away. "Mom," he whispered, "I never meant for it to go this far." I met his eyes and nodded. "I know," I said quietly. "You just never meant to stop." Clara didn't speak to me at all. She kept her chin up, her lipstick perfect, but the cameras waiting outside the courthouse caught her blinking back tears. By the end of the week, every local news site had printed her photo next to the headline, "Teacher outsmarts son and daughter in law and property fraud scandal." The comments beneath were merciless. The neighborhood took longer to settle. People have a strange way of mixing pity with gossip. At the grocery store, a woman I'd known for 30 years touched my arm and said, "You poor thing." None of us knew. Another whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "If only they'd remembered who built that house." It didn't bother me. The noise of pity is just softer judgment wearing perfume. A month later, the local paper ran a column titled, "The House That Stood Its Ground." It called me a quiet symbol of resilience and the rights of the elderly. I didn't feel like a symbol. I felt like someone who'd finally stopped being erased. The house was still mine, legally and wholly, but every creak of its floorboards carried ghosts I didn't want anymore. I walked through each room one last time, touching the walls the way one touches an old photograph before letting it go. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and endings. When the real estate agent asked if I was sure about selling, I told her, "A home isn't sacred when the heart's inside rot. Let someone else fill it with kindness." She looked startled, then nodded. "It's a beautiful property," she said softly. "I sold it for less than it was worth. People thought I was being sentimental. They were wrong. I just wanted clean hands, not profit. With the money, I bought a small cottage on the edge of town, where the noise fades into crickets and the air smells like lavender. The day I moved in, I planted 3 rows of it by the fence. June came by with a pot of tea and a small wooden plaque that read, "Peace resides here." "You'll like it," she said. "No one here calls anyone furniture." We laughed an easy, real laugh, not the brittle kind that fills a tense room. For the first time in years, the sound didn't echo off regret. It stayed where it belonged. The cottage was simple, 2 rooms, wide windows, a porch big enough for silence to sit beside me. At night, I wrote in a new notebook, the pages blank and patient. I didn't write about revenge or regret. I wrote about math again, and how even after everything, the equations still balanced. Sometimes, I thought about Evan not as the man he became, but as the boy who once fell asleep over fractions at the kitchen table. Prison would change him. Maybe it would also carve something honest out of him again. As for Clara, the last I heard, she'd moved away. I hoped she'd find a place without mirrors. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding. When the lavender bloomed for the first time, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the sun fold itself into the horizon. The scent carried through the open window, soft and forgiving. The house I left behind was just timber and memory now, but this little place, it breathed differently. Here, I didn't feel owned by the past. I felt rebuilt. A year slipped by, like a page turning itself. Seasons came and went without permission, and I let them. The lavender grew taller than the fence now, its scent stretching through my open windows like memory softened by time. The cottage had learned my rhythm. The whistle of the kettle at dawn, the slow creak of the rocking chair in the afternoon, the hush of paper as I wrote letters to June. Some days, I'd sit outside with a notebook on my lap, not to write about pain, but to record the quiet, the exact color of morning light, the weight of silence when no one expected anything from me. That was new. Freedom doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives as peace you didn't know you were allowed to feel. June still visited once a month, bringing lemon muffins and stories from her appraisal work. She'd grown into the kind of woman I always knew she would be: sharp, kind, unshakable. The world had tried to make her small too, but she'd learned the same lesson I had. There's power in staying calm when everyone else is shouting. One afternoon, she handed me a bundle of mail, smiling. "You've become a bit of a celebrity, you know. People write to you now." I laughed. They must be bored. But that night, after she left, I opened the letters anyway. Most were from strangers: thank yous, confessions, small stories of betrayal and survival. One caught my eye. Shaky handwriting, blue ink on lined paper. "Dear Mrs. Beckett," it began. "I read about what you did for yourself. My son tried to take my house too. Because of your case, the lawyer stopped him. I wanted to tell you that you saved me without knowing it." At the bottom, the woman had signed simply, "Helen, age 78. I held the letter for a long time. Then I wrote back, my words slow, deliberate. "Dear Helen, I didn't fight to inspire. I fought to exist. Sometimes that's enough. Take care of your home and yourself. They are the same thing, really. Nora." I sealed the envelope and left it by the window for morning mail. The air smelled like rain but felt forgiving. A week later, June came by again, standing at the porch rail, looking at the lavender. "You've made this place yours," she said. I nodded. "It's kind. It doesn't remember pain." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever miss the old house?" I looked toward the horizon, where the sky dipped into the trees. "No," I said. "Some walls echo too loud. I needed quiet." She smiled, and we stood there a while without speaking. There was no need. Silence was fluent between us. When she left, I brewed a fresh pot of tea and sat by the window. The afternoon light poured across the floor like honey, touching the pages of my notebook, the cup in my hand, the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of insult. I thought of Henry and how he'd said, "This house will never betray you." He'd been right in his own way. The betrayal hadn't come from the house, it had come from the people who forgot what it meant to build one. The wind shifted, carrying the soft rustle of feathers. I turned toward the sound just as a small brown sparrow fluttered through the open window, landed on the table, and looked at me without fear. For a moment, we just studied each other, two creatures that had learned to stay when it was easier to flee. "You're brave," I told it. "Most things that fly don't come back." It hopped closer, pecked once at a crumb, and then lifted off, circling once before settling on the porch railing. I followed it outside, the boards warm beneath my bare feet. The world smelled alive again. "They called me furniture," I said, "to no one and to everything." Maybe I was. I held what mattered, and when it was time, I watched the bird spread its wings into the sunlight. I let go. The air went still, then filled with the sound of its flight, small, certain, unstoppable. I stayed on the porch until the light began to fade, letting the silence wrap around me like a soft, familiar blanket. The house didn't creak anymore. It didn't need to. It was finally, mercifully, at rest, and so was I. And that's how it ended, my dear listeners, quietly. The way all storms should. No shouting, no fireworks, just truth, finally standing where lies used to sit. If this story reached a part of you that remembers pain, forgiveness, or the power of waiting, then you already understand what I've learned. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just breathes. Thank you for listening to my story, for walking with me through every shadow and silence. And if you believe that voices like mine, voices of women who endured, remembered, and finally spoke, deserve to be heard, then please subscribe to Grand MA True Stories. Every click, every share, every word of yours helps keep stories like this alive. Stories that whisper truth, honor the forgotten, and remind the world that revenge has no expiration date and wisdom never fades. Until next time, take care of your home, your heart, and the quiet that lives between them. This is Grandma, signing off with love, strength, and a story that finally found peace.